All right, everyone, we're going to get started today. Hi, welcome to CMU Simulation Lab. My name is Laura Whiteside. I'm a nurse practitioner. I work here as an educator in the lab. And thank you so much for joining us for our IPE simulation event. We're so excited to have you today. I'm going to talk to you for a few minutes about our plan, first for our outline for the day. And then I'm going to dive in to my presentation here. So our plan for the day, we're going to spend about first hour or so in this room. I'm going to go through an orientation of our plan for the day. We're going to do a little bit of an icebreaker, going to get to know each other a little bit better. Then I'm going to go through our rules of simulation and some expectations we have here while we're in the lab. And then we're going to go actually into one of our simulation rooms and kind of give you a tour of our facility and of our mannequins and all of our technology so everyone feels more comfortable before we start with our simulations today. So, and then after that we will be splitting into two different teams, and you're all going to be participating into two different learning stations. One of which is going to be a fully immersive team-based activity in the form of an escape room. And then the second is going to be a high-fidelity simulation. These are going to be teams of all disciplines that we have here today, and you'll do the same scenario with the same team. So it'll be a 1 hour long session that's going to include time for the scenario and a debrief discussion afterwards. And then we'll take a break in the middle and have a little breakfast, time for all of us to talk to each other, and then we'll do the second station. The way we're going to wrap up today is we'll all come back into this room. We have a survey for you to fill out, and we'd love to hear your feedback. This is a newer curriculum that we're developing, and we'd love to hear your input in how we can improve this for future learning to help this continue to grow. So we'll have that for you to fill out at the end. Does anyone have any questions about our format for the day before I dive into our orientation and rules of our lab here? No. All right, sounds good. So we are all here for the IPE learning experience today. These are our learning objectives that we're going to be working to meet today. To increase the knowledge of the scopes of practice with other disciplines and providing quality patient care, how we're similar, how we're different, and potential areas where we overlap and potential areas for conflict. To increase our understanding and respect for the values and beliefs that differentiate various healthcare professionals. To demonstrate understanding of the essentials for collaborative teamwork, including interprofessional team dynamics, communication skills, conflict resolution, and within the context of a well-functioning team. And then there will also be, when we go into our case scenarios, there are going to be also sub-objectives depending on your scope of practice within your own discipline to be met within the two case scenarios. But this is our overall focus and objectives for being here today. All right, so we're going to do this through high-fidelity simulation. So what do we mean by high-fidelity simulation? We mean high realism. So creating real-life clinical scenarios, or as close to real life as possible. We have incredibly advanced technology in the form of our mannequins and how these rooms are set up, and we work to create the most realistic clinical scenarios possible. It does create a simulated, stressful environment, a place where we can learn, a place where we can grow and make mistakes without the risk of doing this on real people, right? We're doing this in a controlled and safe environment without the risk of harm to our patients. So that's really where that value or the benefit for that comes into place, and it's the opportunity for us to learn, adjust our mistakes before we ever come in contact with a real person. And then, in addition to the high-fidelity simulation, is the debrief. So I'll talk in a few minutes about the format of debrief, but what do I mean by that? That's our discussion that we have after the case. So we go through your case scenario. At the end, we'll all sit down in a circle. Your facilitators will come in, and we'll have an in-depth discussion about how that case played out. How that plays against our learning objectives based on best clinical evidence. We're going to look to identify some learning gaps and work to close those so we can otherwise learn more before we go back into our practice. That's really the point of that debrief discussion. So, and using that debrief discussion and how we adjust everything is really what the SimLab does best, right? So with my chart here, learners, everyone comes into the simulation lab with their own frames. What I mean by frames is their own perspective, their own prior experiences, their own training. It's really the reasons as to why you do what you do, why you make your decisions. And this is reflected in the actual performance, what we actually see in your clinical scenarios within the lab. That is then compared to what we call the desired performance, or that's what's going to be based on best clinical evidence, or the specific learning objectives that are the point of that simulation for the day. So we compare the two, and that's where we find our performance or our knowledge gaps. We all have them, right? No matter how long you are in medical practice, you will always have them. They just get smaller over time. But this is where we're going to identify them, work to close them. And then in the ideal adult learner, we hope that they, take that after they take what they've learned here, adjust their frames, and use it to make better decisions the next time they encounter a similar scenario. So that ultimately that is the goal of what we're trained and what we're working to do today. So this is going to move me into our kind of rules and expectations while we're in the lab here. So our first of which is I'm setting the stage with our basic assumption. So basic assumption here is that we believe that everyone participating in simulation is intelligent, capable, cares about doing their best, and wants to improve. So we start with that basic assumption because we are putting you into a stressful environment. And this is also an area where mistakes are going to be made. We want them to be made here, right? So we can talk about it, we can learn from them, and we know better before we go back to work with our patients. But this kind of sets the same stage that everyone really is here to learn, to kind of bring us back to that main focus. And that helps us to create a safe learning environment. When I say safe, that doesn't mean comfortable, right? We're going to challenge you. We're going to push you outside of your comfort zones. We do expect to make mistakes, but we expect your best efforts as well. And we also mean a psychologically safe environment. And in creating that safe environment, we have a couple of rules, one of which is the rule of confidentiality. I like to call it the Las Vegas rule of simulation. What happens in the lab stays in the lab. We ask that you don't discuss what goes on within your cases amongst your colleagues or outside of the rooms. That's not just in the hallway here, that's once you leave here as well. We do that in the fact that it creates an environment where you feel safe to make that mistake, right? If I'm in a simulation and I'm team lead and I'm running a code and I ask somebody to give adenosine instead of atropine, and then 20 minutes later out in the hallway I hear, oh, did you hear what Laura did? Can you believe she made such a big medication error? Like, oh my gosh. Am I going to feel safe to make those mistakes and learn in this environment? No. So we ask for that confidentiality from you. Another piece of confidentiality is that we ask that you don't discuss these cases amongst your colleagues. We have a finite number of cases. They take a lot of time and resources to develop, and we also allows us to reuse them with different groups of learners. So if it is discussed, it ultimately taints the learning experiences for other people who come in after you. So we ask that you don't discuss the details of these cases outside of the rooms as well. A few safety things about just our building and within the lab. So within the building itself, did anyone know where the AEDs are or notice them when they came into the building? No, and that's okay. So when you come straight into the front doors, if you look on the left-hand side, it's there at the entry of that hallway, and that's where the AEDs are. The reason I bring that up is we have a lot of medical equipment in this lab. However, none of it is for human use, including real-life defibrillators, but none of it is for human use. So if we have a real-life emergency, that is the emergency equipment we need to go for and then activate emergency response. The second part is that we have a very busy sim lab. We're doing a lot of different things with a lot of different learners. We might have, a staff member that's scheduled to collapse in the lobby as a safe to meet an objective for some of our medical students or residents. You might hear loud noises or lots of other things going on. Because of the nature of what we do, if you come across what appears to be an emergency situation, if it is a real-life emergency, one of our staff will say, this is not a simulation. That is how we know this is real. We need to activate real emergency response and get this person help in whatever way we need to. Okay, so that's just how we disclose, just because of the nature of what we do here. And then our next rules, we like to disclose that, like I said, our defibrillators are real. It has live electricity. Our mannequins are built to absorb that electricity, but we don't need to test it or play around with it. It's just best medical practice whenever you're working with defibrillators to physically clear the mannequin, the patient, and everything around it, and not make sure you're not touching any of it. And also, especially if you were the one running the defibrillator, that you do a good verbal and visual clear. To make sure that we're keeping everybody safe here today. The last is of sharps. Of course, everything is, even though it's not for human use, if you have a sharp, it is, a real dangerous material. Make sure you engage the appropriate safety, and we have sharps containers within all of our rooms for appropriate disposal. All right, so then our next rule or expectation is that we ask that you buy in or suspend your disbelief a bit. So I know our patient is a mannequin, but it's incredibly advanced technology. And we ask that you treat this as a real life scenario. Anything you would do or say or how you would act with a real life person is how we want you to act in these scenarios. That is how you're going to get the most out of this learning experience. So we do ask that you suspend that disbelief and treat this as real as possible. Another aspect we really like to promote here in the lab is the use of the shared mental model. What I mean by that is you speak your thoughts out loud. Well, not only because us in the control room can't read your mind and we don't know what you're thinking unless you say it out loud. However, it's just really good medical practice, especially when you're working with a multidisciplinary team. No one on your team knows what you're thinking unless you speak it out loud. It also is a good medical practice in that it opens the line of communication for somebody else in the room to speak up if they notice something that doesn't quite seem right. So we ask that you speak out loud and share what you're thinking. And then we have potentially either an ESP or is what we call them, or an embedded person. If there is a real live person within your simulation, they're there for a reason. Either to help clarify equipment or physical exam findings, or to help you meet an objective. So they're there for a reason. All right, does anyone have any questions about those rules before I move into our phases of debriefing?
No.
Okay. So the next I'm just going to talk about our specific outline of how we're going to debrief your cases today. The first is we follow a specific model. It's called debriefing with good judgment. And the way when we sit down, the first thing your facilitator is going to ask you for is your emotional reaction. That's just simply how you are feeling. Not how you feel the case went, not how you feel the team lead did, just truly emotions. How are you feeling? The reason we do this, because sometimes it's, oh, I feel great, we saved that patient. But sometimes it's, I feel angry. I feel frustrated, I forgot to get that blood sugar. It allows for that immediate emotional decompression for us to address any feelings that might have been drawn up through these intense scenarios. In order for them, otherwise the learning's not going to be heard. If we don't allow those feelings to be spoken and addressed, then otherwise nothing else from the session is going to be comprehended. So that's what we'll ask from you first. Then we're going to move into facts or summarization of the case. We'll let you know how the case was designed to unfold. That way everyone kind of knows what was supposed to be going on. And then that takes us into the understanding. This is really the beef of your debriefing. This is when we're going to talk about the medicine. We're going to talk about those learning gaps we noticed. Why, and ask you kind of what was going on in your head when you made different decisions, so we can understand the frames and we can adjust them. This is an active discussion. This is not a lecture where your facilitator is just speaking at you. So we do expect your full engagement and participation. It is meant to be an active discussion. And then at the end of our debriefing sessions, the way we will wrap this up is we do takeaway messages. So that's going to be one thing that you were reminded of, something you learned, or something that really stood out from you that you're going to take away from this simulated scenario back into your everyday practice. So we'll ask everybody for one takeaway after we do each case. Okay? So that's kind of how we'll go through that format. Does anyone have any questions on how we're going to go through that format? All right. And then one other thing we like to disclose, everything in our lab, including this room right now, is video recorded. This video recording is only for the purpose of education. It's streamed to a cloud that only our staff has access to. The only reason it is accessed is for us to review it for potential, for future curriculum planning. And for also if an individual learner wants to look back to reflect on their own performance. This doesn't go anywhere else. Because you are under video recording, we do ask for your consent, and that's why we disclose that, which is kind of what it's for and where it would go, and ask for your consent to be recorded today. And then while in the lab, if you have any additional resources that you would use in your clinical environment, including your phone, you are allowed to use them, right? It's not your job to know everything, it's your job to use your references and know where to find it. So you are allowed to use those references, and we encourage it within the lab. If there's any access to reference you would have in your clinical environment, please use it. All right, does anyone have any questions on anything I covered before we go into the sim lab to do our orientation and tour of the room? All right, sounds good. Thank you guys so much for your engagement. We'll get up and head into the other room.